For 5 years, I lectured my fiancé that only weak and insecure people need monogamy. Have you ever been so profoundly confident in a belief, only to have to stand by and watch as that very belief systematically destroys everything you love? This is the story of how I didn't just lose the love of my life. I'm the one who handed him the instruction manual on how to leave me, and I couldn't even complain. It's a peculiar brand of torment, isn't it? The kind you inflict upon yourself. It's the slow, agonizing realization that the very bedrock of your identity, the sophisticated philosophy you've painstakingly built and polished over years, is nothing more than sand. For what feels like an eternity, I, Emily Carter, stood proudly on my self-constructed pedestal, a self-appointed oracle of modern relationships, delivering sermons to anyone within earshot. Monogamy? I'd scoff, a dismissive wave of my hand accompanying the word. A relic of a bygone era, a sentimental crutch for the insecure, a gilded cage designed to stifle personal growth. True evolved love, I would confidently lecture, my voice filled with the unshakable certainty of the young and arrogant, especially to my fiancé Mark, is about absolute freedom. It's about trusting your partner so completely that you not only allow them to explore, but you actively want them to grow, even if that growth happens outside the confines of your shared experience. The irony now is so dense, so suffocating, it feels like a physical weight on my chest. Because my fiancé, Mark, oh, he's exploring, he is growing and discovering and experiencing. He's just doing it all in someone else's bed, tangled in someone else's sheets. And the most exquisite part of this self-inflicted torture, the cruelest twist of the knife? According to the Gospel of Emily Carter, I don't even have the right to complain. Our story began 5 years ago, a storybook romance born in the crucible of final exams and caffeine-fueled all-nighters at UCLA. It was a whirlwind, the kind you read about, where every moment felt cinematic. Mark was the embodiment of the California dream, impossibly kind, fiercely intelligent, with that sun-kissed, all-American charm that could disarm armies. He wasn't just handsome, he was a good, solid man. We didn't just fall in love. We meticulously built a life together, brick by brick, in a cozy, sun-drenched bungalow in Santa Monica, a stone's throw from the ocean. Our home was filled with the scent of salt and coffee, with the sound of our shared laughter, with ambitious blueprints for our future, and, of course, with my unwavering, often unsolicited pronouncements on the antiquated nature of traditional commitment. My views weren't a fleeting phase or a rebellious affectation. They were the very core of my worldview, forged in the fires of observation. I had seen too many friends' parents go through acrimonious divorces, watched too many relationships around me curdle into resentment and possession. I had convinced myself, with the fervor of a convert, that the only antidote to this marital decay was a radical cocktail of open communication, fierce independence, and a level of emotional autonomy that bordered on detachment. Mark, my sweet, easygoing Mark, was the perfect audience. He would listen patiently, his head tilted, that thoughtful expression on his face. Most of the time, he just nodded along. Every now and then, I'd catch a fleeting shadow cross his deep blue eyes, a flicker of something unreadable, doubt, perhaps, or a quiet confusion. But he never mounted a real defense. "Whatever makes you happy, Em," was his standard refrain, a phrase always followed by a disarming smile and a hug that pulled me in so tight it felt like an answer in itself. I foolishly interpreted his placid acceptance as profound understanding. I saw him not as a man quietly compromising, but as an enlightened partner, evolved enough to recognize the irrefutable logic in my words. Then she arrived. Her name was Sarah. At first, she was just a name dropped casually into conversation, a new colleague at the high-end architectural firm where Mark was making a name for himself. He spoke of her with professional admiration. Sarah has an incredible eye for sustainable design, he'd mention over dinner. Sarah and I managed to solve that zoning issue for the Westwood project. It was all so innocuous, so perfectly harmless. I was Emily Carter, the cool, confident girlfriend. I wasn't going to be that cliché, the insecure woman who saw a threat in every female colleague. To do so would be weak. But the narrative began to shift, subtly at first. The occasional after-work drink to celebrate a win became a weekly ritual. The late nights at the office, once reserved for major deadlines, became more frequent. Just a few of us hammering out the final details. He'd text, the words glowing on my screen, somehow feeling both reasonable and hollow. I doubled down on my persona, priding myself on my enlightened understanding. I'd reply with a breezy, "No worries, kill it," while a strange, unfamiliar knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. The little things, the tiny cracks in our shared reality, began to accumulate. It was the way his phone, once casually left on the coffee table, was now always screened down or in his pocket. It was the way a text would light up his face with a private, fleeting smile that I knew wasn't meant for me. It was the way he'd seem just a little more distant when we were together, his body present, but his mind drifting to some inaccessible place. The emotional space between us was growing, a quiet, creeping void. The tipping point was our planned anniversary trip, a long-awaited romantic getaway to a secluded resort in Napa Valley. We had talked about it for months, fantasized about the wine tasting, the gourmet meals, the uninterrupted time together. A week before we were supposed to leave, he dropped the bomb. He couldn't go. A critical, can't-miss client meeting had come up. It was all weekend. He was so apologetic, so seemingly disappointed, that I felt guilty for the flash of suspicion that shot through me. I swallowed my disappointment, reminding myself that supporting his career was paramount. I was the understanding partner. But a nagging question echoed in the back of my mind. What client meeting could possibly be so critical as to consume an entire weekend? My carefully constructed fortress of nonchalance was beginning to show serious signs of stress. The very freedom I had championed as a virtue now felt like a terrifying, gaping chasm opening between us. I fought against the rising tide of doubt, using my own philosophies as a shield. Jealousy is just insecurity, Emily, I'd tell myself. It's a lack of trust. And I trusted Mark. Of course I did. I had to. Because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. The alternative meant admitting that my entire belief system, my very identity as a modern woman, was built on a foundation of flawed, arrogant assumptions. The truth, as it so often does, didn't arrive with a dramatic, cinematic explosion. It arrived on a quiet, sun-drenched Sunday afternoon, with a sickeningly mundane thud that shattered my world. Mark had gone for a run along the beach, or at least that's what he had said. His phone, which he had forgotten in his haste, lay on our quartz kitchen countertop. I was making coffee, the familiar, comforting aroma filling the air. Then, the screen lit up. A notification. A text message from a contact simply named Sarah. My own heartbeat hammered in my ears, a frantic counterpoint to the quiet afternoon. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone, a voice in my head screaming at me to stop, to look away, to honor the privacy I supposedly held so dear. But I couldn't. The preview of the message was there, clear as day. 3 simple, devastating words. Last night was amazing. The world didn't just tilt, It spun off its axis. The warm air in our sunny kitchen suddenly felt thick and suffocating, pressing down on my chest. My carefully constructed walls of intellectualism, of emotional superiority, didn't just crumble. They vaporized, leaving me exposed and raw. I had spent years theorizing about the abstract beauty of emotional freedom, and in one horrifying instant, I was confronted with its brutal, tangible consequences. I, Emily Carter, the enlightened champion of open relationships, was staring at digital proof that my fiancé had found that freedom with someone else. And the most twisted, sickening part of it all was that by my own logic, my own oft-repeated rules, what right did I possibly have to be this shattered? I had laid the groundwork. I had tilled the soil and planted the seeds. I had, in essence, handed him the shovel to dig my own grave. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in denial and duplicity. We were two actors in a play about a happy couple, delivering our lines with forced smiles while the set crumbled around us. Mark was a portrait of oblivious normalcy, or perhaps he was just a far better actor than I was. My emotional state was a violent pendulum, swinging between a hollow, numb disbelief and a white-hot, unfamiliar rage. It was an anger that felt profoundly hypocritical, a visceral betrayal of every principle I claimed to hold. How could I confront him? The words were trapped in my throat, strangled by the weight of my own past pronouncements. To accuse him would be to admit my own philosophy was a sham. Then came the dinner party. It was an annual event at his parents' stately home in Pasadena, a perfectly manicured world of traditional values and quiet wealth that always felt like a different planet from our Santa Monica life. The Carters, Patricia, and Richard had always treated me with a kind of cautious, formal politeness. They never openly criticized my life choices, but I could always feel their silent judgment, their unspoken disapproval of my unconventional views on marriage and commitment. This dinner, however, felt different from the moment we walked in. The air was charged with an unspoken tension, a subtle atmospheric shift that made the knot of dread in my stomach tighten into a cold, hard stone. And there she was, Sarah. Mark had conveniently failed to mention that she would be gracing the Carter family dinner with her presence. She was standing next to him by the grand fireplace, laughing at something he'd said. Her hand rested on his forearm, a casual, proprietary gesture that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The ease between them, the shared bubble of intimacy they occupied, was not just a punch to the gut, it was a public declaration. All my high-minded theories about the beauty of platonic connections and the irrelevance of jealousy evaporated into pathetic, self-deluding nonsense. The entire evening became a torturous spectator sport. I watched, helpless, as Sarah masterfully integrated herself into the family dynamic. She complimented Mark's tie with a warmth that felt far from professional. She laughed, a little too loudly, at all his jokes. She adeptly steered every conversation back to their shared projects at the firm, peppering her anecdotes with inside jokes that effectively rendered me an outsider. She was a master of her craft, and I was her unwilling audience. Mark, for his part, seemed to be floating on a cloud of her adoration, completely oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of the silent agony I was enduring just a few feet away. His mother, Patricia, a woman whose perfectly coiffed silver hair and cool blue eyes radiated controlled disapproval, chose her moment with surgical precision. During a lull in the dinner conversation, she turned to me, her smile a thin, bloodless line. "It's just so important for a woman to be truly supportive of her partner's career ambitions," she said, her gaze pinning me to my chair. "All those late nights, it takes a special kind of understanding, doesn't it, Emily?" The comment was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a veiled accusation that I was somehow failing in my supportive duties, while conveniently ignoring the fact that his support system was now sitting right next to him. The evening crawled on, an endless parade of microaggressions. Every shared glance between Mark and Sarah, every laugh that didn't include me, every casual, lingering touch of her hand on his arm, twisted the knife a little deeper. I felt like a phantom at the feast, a ghost haunting the life that was being systematically dismantled right before my eyes. The freedom I had so arrogantly championed had become my prison, a wide-open door through which my fiancé had gleefully skipped, leaving me trapped alone in the smoldering ruins of my own ideology. Finally, mercifully, the ordeal ended. The drive back down the 210 freeway to Santa Monica was shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. The tension in the car was a palpable entity, a third passenger sitting between us. I stared blankly out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red through the film of unshed tears in my eyes. The sheer weight of my denial, the colossal scale of my self-deception, finally came crashing down, and I knew I couldn't endure another moment of this silent charade. "Mark," I began, my voice a raw, broken whisper that was barely audible over the hum of the engine. The dam had finally broken. "Who is she? Who is Sarah to you?" He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound filled with a bone-deep exhaustion that I knew had little to do with the late hour. "Emily," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was not a talk. It was an autopsy. It was a slow, methodical, agonizing dissection of the 5 years we had spent together, laying bare all the decay I had refused to see. He admitted everything: the after-work drinks that had bled into intimate dinners, the critical client meetings that were, in fact, clandestine dates, the weekend in Napa he was supposed to spend with me, which he had actually spent with her at a boutique hotel in Carmel. He spoke of a spark, a profound connection he felt with Sarah, a shared passion for their work that he claimed had fizzled out between us long ago. "She just gets it, Em," he said, his voice pleading for an understanding I was incapable of giving. "She gets the pressure, the ambition." His words were not just words. They were shards of glass, embedding themselves in the raw, open wound of my heart. The freedom I had so brazenly declared as the cornerstone of a healthy, modern love had, in reality, become the fertile ground where his infidelity had taken root and blossomed. The supreme irony was a cruel, relentless twist of the knife. I had dismissed monogamy as weak, and now I was the one left feeling utterly, devastatingly powerless, as my fiancé calmly confessed his emotional and physical betrayal. "And us, Mark?" I finally managed to choke out, the raw pain shredding what was left of my composure. "What about the past 5 years? Our home? Our future? Does any of that mean anything?" He finally turned to look at me, his expression a painful mixture of guilt and pity. "I don't know, Emily. I honestly don't. Maybe we were never on the same page. You always had these big ideas, these theories about how things should be. I tried, Em. I really tried to be the man you wanted me to be, the man who believed all those things. But—" He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging in the air, more damning than anything he could have said. "But I'm not that man, and she loves me for the man I actually am." The weeks that followed were not just a living hell. They were a descent into a new kind of purgatory. Our once cozy bungalow became a silent, sterile battleground. We were ghosts, haunting the same space but separated by an impassable chasm of betrayal and resentment. The silence was a living entity, heavy and oppressive, broken only by clipped logistical conversations. Who gets the Eames chair? How do we split the deposit? Each question was a small, painful death. His parents, no longer needing to feign politeness, became openly hostile. Patricia called me once, her voice dripping with a syrupy, insincere concern. She spoke of Mark's happiness, of how he seemed so much lighter recently, of how Sarah was a lovely, traditional girl. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to inflict maximum pain. It stung, not because I craved her approval, but because it was a brutal confirmation of my complete and utter failure. Mark, meanwhile, became a ghost in his own home. He was rarely there. When he was, the scent of Sarah's perfume, a cloying floral scent I had come to despise, clung to his clothes like a second skin. It was a constant olfactory reminder of where he'd been, who he'd been with. And still, that insidious voice in my head whispered, "You have no right to complain. This is the freedom you wanted. He is simply exploring his connections." I was trapped in a prison of my own making, forced to abide by the very rules that were destroying me. The final act of our tragedy played out on a dreary, rain-slicked Tuesday evening. I came home late from work, emotionally and physically drained, to find the living room in disarray. Mark was standing by the couch, a large suitcase open at his feet. He was methodically folding one of his favorite sweaters. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice devoid of all emotion. The question was a mere formality. I already knew the answer. He looked up, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something other than guilt in his eyes. It was relief, a profound, unburdened relief. "I'm moving out, Emily," he said, his voice clear and steady. The words, though expected, still landed with the force of a physical blow, knocking the remaining air from my lungs. "Where are you going?" The question felt stupid, pathetic, even as it left my lips. His gaze dropped to the half-packed suitcase, a silent confirmation of the obvious. "I'm going to stay with Sarah for a while," he said softly. "We're going to see where this goes." A bitter, broken laugh escaped my lips. It was a horrifying sound. "Of course you are, of course." The sheer, staggering irony of it all was almost beautiful in its cruelty. I had preached the gospel of non-monogamy. I had sneered at the weakness of traditional commitment. And now, my fiancé was leaving me to move in with another woman, to pursue a real, committed relationship built on the very principles I had so arrogantly discarded. As he zipped up the suitcase, the sound echoing in the silent room like a gunshot, a wave of vertigo washed over me. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "I am sorry, Em," he said, and I almost believed he was. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You just wanted the freedom to do it anyway," I whispered to the empty space after he was gone. I stood alone in the center of our living room, the room suddenly feeling vast and cavernous. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a screaming, mocking void, amplifying the profound hollowness in my chest. Days bled into weeks, a monotonous gray blur of grief and regret. The emptiness of the bungalow was a constant physical ache. His side of the bed remained cold and unslept in. His coffee mug sat unwashed by the sink. I started to re-examine everything, sifting through the wreckage of our shared life like an archaeologist at a dig site, searching for the moment it all went wrong. One rainy Saturday, I pulled out a box of old photographs. I sat on the floor, pictures spread around me like fallen leaves. There was one from our first anniversary, a silly selfie we took at the Santa Monica Pier, cotton candy stuck to my nose. We looked so young, so ridiculously happy. And then I found it. A photo from our engagement party. We were standing under a string of fairy lights in his parents' backyard. My head was thrown back in laughter, my face beaming up at him, and he was looking at me, not at the camera, not at anyone else, just at me. The look in his eyes was one of utter, unconditional adoration and a deep, unwavering commitment. A commitment I had taken, belittled, and ultimately thrown back in his face. A sob, raw and guttural, tore its way out of my throat. I had been so obsessed with proving a point, so determined to be different, to be more evolved than everyone else, that I had failed to see the precious, beautiful reality right in front of me. I had called monogamy weak. The truth, I now realized, was that it takes an incredible strength to commit to one person, to choose them again and again, day after day. It was my own arrogance, my own intellectual vanity, my own fear of being seen as ordinary. That was the real weakness. And now, Mark was in her bed. He was likely giving her that same look of adoration, finding with her the simple, profound connection that I had deemed too unsophisticated, too conventional. He had found his strength, his commitment, with someone who valued it, someone who didn't think it was weak. It's a peculiar brand of torment, isn't it? The kind you so meticulously architect for yourself. I had called monogamy weak. Now, as I sit here, alone in the quiet wreckage of the life we were supposed to build, I can't even summon the energy to complain. Because when I look in the mirror, past the hollow eyes and the broken heart, I know with a soul-crushing certainty that I have no one to blame but myself. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have recognized the quiet warnings in your partner's eyes? Would you have swallowed your intellectual pride and admitted what your heart truly wanted, long before it was too late? Or would you, like me, have clung so tightly to your own flawed convictions that you ended up pushing away the one thing that truly mattered? Perhaps, in the end, the most profound weakness of all is the stubborn refusal to see the truth of your own heart, especially when it dares to contradict the clever, sophisticated theories you've built up in your head. And that, I have learned in the most brutal way imaginable, is a weakness I can no longer afford to possess.